Hello and welcome to Moving Kentucky Forward. I'm Bruce Maples, publisher of Forward Kentucky. A few weeks ago, we had Robert Kahne on this show to analyze the election results, and we realized after we finished that we had never talked about the mayor's race in Louisville and Lexington or the judicial races, and we thought those were important. So I've invited him back so we can have a second Robert Kahne interview to talk about those races and the overall election. Let's hear from Robert again. So we're back today with Robert Kahne. I won't give him the long introduction I gave last time, which was a couple of sessions ago. We're just going to get together and continue our discussion about the election results. Robert, welcome back to Moving Kentucky Forward.
I appreciate you having me back on, Bruce. It was really fun last time, so I'm looking forward to it this time as well.
Well, to set the stage, if you missed our first show, go back 2 shows and look at it. Robert did a really great job of breaking down some of the election results. But after we finished, we realized that we had not talked about the mayor's race in Louisville or Lexington, and we hadn't talked about the judicial races, including the race for the Supreme Court. And so I just said, well, let's just do this again. So, Robert, tell us what you think about these 2 mayor's races in Louisville and Lexington.
Well, I guess we can start with the more boring one, which was Lexington, where Mayor Linda Gorton won, going away with close to 70% of the voters. So maybe not quite that high, but it was a lot of. It was not close. She won nearly every precinct. I think she might have won every precinct in the entire city of Lexington. And, it was pretty non-dramatic. I think Lexington very much likes Linda Gorton. I think David Kloiber did a good job of getting his name out there. I think he did a pretty good job of talking about his message, but, I don't think it was quite enough to win. And I don't really know if that was his goal in the first place. I think his goal in the first place was to, provide an alternative and to kind of give a little bit of a contrast, not kind of give it to Mayor Gorton without any sort of race whatsoever. And I think he accomplished that goal. I think, and I mean, we had him on our show. We really liked him. Kind of a heterodox kind of guy. Like, it's not, these races are nonpartisan. So they're not really like left versus right. They're just kind of like a lot of things versus a lot of things. And I don't know for sure. We really enjoyed having Linda Gorton on our show, but it's hard to say if she would have come on if David Kloiber hadn't come on first, so that's the type of thing that David Kloiber allows for in this kind of a race. I think she had a good time, so maybe she'll come back now, but I don't know if she would have come on in the first place if it had been for him. So anyways, that's that race.
So let's talk about the Louisville race, which turned out the way anybody a year before would have probably predicted, but it certainly didn't feel like the normal Louisville mayor race in terms of, I had people calling me saying, okay, is Greenberg in trouble? What's going on there? And I was fascinated by where he positioned himself. So I'll let you weigh in on that. I have a couple of thoughts, but why don't you say what you think about the mayor's race?
Yeah, I think with Craig Greenberg, he was facing some pretty significant headwinds, especially for a Democrat in Louisville. I think the mayor of Louisville is a little bit opposite of the governor of Kentucky. Like, if you're a Republican running for governor of Kentucky, you have a strong base that you're running from, but sometimes you have somebody before you who did a bad job, or maybe you did a bad job in your last term, and you're facing like these significant headwinds that you have to overcome. And that is kind of what happened with Craig Greenberg in Louisville, where Greg Fisher, currently the mayor of Louisville, extremely unpopular in every direction. The right and the left despise the man right now for different reasons, but kind of maybe the core of the way that he went about governing during 2020, especially, I think rubbed a lot of people the wrong way across the political spectrum. Craig Greenberg looks kind of maybe talks, doesn't draw a physical contrast to Greg Fisher in any real significant way. They're both, white men with wealth who, have been connected to politics for quite a long time. You also have the fact that it's going to be a Republican year in government. With you have President Biden, who's very unpopular, especially in Kentucky. You have all of this money being spent on these state legislative races for Republicans, especially in Louisville. You have all of these kind of like headwinds running against you, and including Bill DeRiff, the Republican candidate, who is not a Donald Trump, not a Matt Bevin type person. He's a good fit as a Republican running for mayor of Louisville. So he has all this kind of going against him, but he still has this core base of Democrats in Louisville. So those kind of things added up, and I think Craig Greenberg's task in the general election was kind of to hold on, to do what you can to draw as much of a contrast between you and Bill DeRiff, to frame Bill DeRiff as, a person who's the party of Trump, the party of Matt Bevin, and to do as much as you can to say, I will be different than Greg Fisher. Here's my plan, to kind of just try to shore up and build as many allyships as you can. And I think he was able to do all of those things, and that added up to about a six-point win for him. So, all in all, I think it was a pretty good race that he ran, even if he wasn't able to achieve, that 20-30 point victory that Greg Fisher was during those strong Democratic years in 2018. And I guess that was the strongest, and he faced like minimal opposition, I think, in 2014. So yeah.
I was interested. You talked about creating a contrast with Greg Fisher, and you also talked about Greg Fisher's unpopularity currently. I can remember when most of the people in the city were really supportive of Greg Fisher. And, if he had run with that same thing this time, he still might have had quite a significant win. Greenberg, I don't know if you saw the Mark Murphy cartoon where he had Greg Fisher morphing into Craig Greenberg and basically said, Greg Fisher 2.0. And I thought that was one of the hardest things, was how does Greenberg do that contrast? I did not. Now, this is me, Robert. I did not see that much contrast.
Well, he certainly
talked about, and I didn't frankly see a lot of contrast between him and DeRiff either.
Yeah, I think that you have to think about contrast less in terms of issues and more in terms of framing. We read a lot of the political news. We look at people's party platforms. The fact that, the closing message from the Greenberg campaign was a new direction for Louisville. Makes him look like, I saw that ad. It actually flashed up a new direction for Louisville before it said it was a Craig Greenberg ad. I thought it was going to be a Bill DeRiff ad. That's kind of the message that the out party typically runs. That's the way that he talked about this. I think a lot of the people who are saying Greg Fisher 2.0 are literally just drawing like a physical comparison between the two. Greg Fisher is a very, he's not like politically conservative. He's not like a homophobe or transphobe. He doesn't like hate black people or anything like that, I don't think. But he's very conservative in terms of his approach to governance. Like he refused to fire the police officers after the killing of Breonna Taylor because he said that would be against the union contract. I expect, now this is just me, and maybe, you can tell me I have rose-colored glasses on or whatever, but in my, interactions with Greg Greenberg would fire the cops immediately. That's just the type of person I see him as being. In a lot of the ways that he's talked about governing, Greg Fisher, I think that his criticisms of like a lot of his plans are like, we have a big problem with like abandoned cars on the streets. And Greg Fisher is like, well, we have to draw up a whole proposal. We have to do a whole study about what's going on here. We have to think about what the legal options are. And Craig Greenberg's like, we're going to come up with a policy that's fast and short. We'll be like, if it's been on the street more than 2 weeks without warning, we're just going to tow it. We're going to get rid of it. And if somebody wants to sue us, they can do it. That is kind of how his campaign is, I feel like, drawn a pretty significant contrast to Greg Fisher. So, we'll see once he goes into office, but I do expect that there will be a significant difference in the way that he governs versus the way that Greg Fisher governed.
All right. So now let's talk about judges and judicial races. Which judicial race struck you as either the most important or the biggest surprise?
I think probably the most important was the the Supreme Court race in Northern Kentucky, where Joe Fisher faced off against Justice Keller. I think it's Michelle Keller. I don't remember her for. I think it's Michelle Keller, who is the incumbent in that race. And I said the way that I've kind of been framing a lot of these races is in Kentucky, we're starting to see this dynamic where we have Republican partisans facing off against like jurists, people who care about the law and interpreting the law as their core principle. And those are kind of the races that we're seeing in a lot of these judicial races. And there's been kind of three on the Supreme Court level that I feel like we've seen. And this was the most severe partisan one where Joe Fisher was literally running with an elephant on his campaign signs. He was talking about how conservative he was when he was running for the Supreme Court justice. Of course, we had Whitney Westerfield, who ran for Supreme Court down in the Bowling Green area, that seat. And he was running as a Republican state senator, talked about his conservative record also. And that was kind of that race also, and Whitney Westerfield lost. And then the third one, which is probably the weakest example of all, because it kind of works both ways, where you had Bob Conley, who is a very conservative judge out in Eastern Kentucky, facing off against Chris Harris, who is a state representative who was a Democrat. Bob Conley talked about how conservative he was, but I felt like he actually talked about it from more of a judicial. He actually did kind of draw a distinction. He had never served in the legislature, whereas, Chris Harris was a Democratic state legislator. So, trying to make the jump from the state legislature to the Supreme Court has not been an easy thing to do for either party. And I do think it is kind of like going to show that in Kentucky, at least, we do kind of understand the importance of an independent judiciary. And we aren't interested in electing partisans, even in areas as conservative as that Supreme Court seat, which is a very, very conservative area in Kentucky. So
did you get the feeling that a lot of the Republican leadership in the state saw Joe Fisher as something of a bomb thrower, and they weren't necessarily interested in supporting him very much?
I think they saw him as a bomb thrower, but I don't necessarily think that meant they weren't really willing to support him. I think he got a lot of support. Maybe not. I do think that there are some Republicans in this state that don't feel like the way that he ran for judge is necessarily appropriate. But I also think that means they wouldn't support anybody for judge, because they understand the partisan nature of their office, and they kind of don't see it as their job to do that. So it could be like a very milquetoast, normal guy who would probably support Republicans, and they would be like, well, that's not really my job. And I think that that's appropriate. So I do feel like that's probably the way it went. We had a second Supreme Court seat that was kind of in the same vein, a little bit more like there were a lot of Republican money being poured into one candidate. That candidate lost. We also had a district court seat in Franklin County that I think may have had the highest dollar per vote amount in the history of American politics.
That was the one I was about to say. There's one race that I am absolutely positive every Republican in the state was interested in, seeing Judge Shepard ushered out, and yet he won.
Yeah, and it wasn't even close. I mean, frankly, so and you're starting to see this. We talked a little bit about it when we talked about Amendment 2 and Amendment 1 last time we spoke, with this kind of voters in Kentucky are more willing to support nonpartisan or are willing to support progressive causes as long as they're nonpartisan. They're willing to vote for an abortion amendment. They're willing to vote against the Republican legislature as long as it's doesn't include a D by their name. Franklin County is one of the most progressive places in Kentucky. It may not have voted for Hillary Clinton. I think it did vote for Joe Biden, though. It's the seat of a state government. It has a Democratic state representative in most of Franklin County. So it's one of the more progressive spaces. So it wasn't close. He won by quite a bit. And that I think is more evidence of that. Even more conservative or even more Republican voters in Kentucky are not necessarily into conservative causes.
So, is there anything else that we need to look at or talk about the judicial races?
Judicial races, let's see. Those are kind of the bigger ones that I was thinking about. Those two Supreme Court cases, the Supreme Court races, the North, and then the one in Franklin County. In Louisville, I do want to shout out that we did have several public defenders that won both, I think, one circuit court race and I think two district court races. So, we have a few former public defenders who are already on the bench, Annie O'Connell being one of them. But we have Sarah Clay, Yvette De La Guardia, and there's one more, and I can't believe I'm forgetting. It's been a couple weeks since election day, but we have a few public defenders going into the bench here in Louisville, which that's a big deal. It is really important, I think, to get a diverse set of viewpoints onto the bench in a county, especially when as diverse as Louisville. The days of you need to have had prosecutorial experience in order to be elected are behind us, and I think that that's probably a good thing. We did see a Republican elected citywide in Louisville with Bobby Holtzclaw holding on for the county clerk's race. She'll, I guess, serve till she dies. I thought Tina Ward Pugh ran a good race, but name recognition and just history, I guess, causes a lot of stuff there. So, that's still kind of ripe for the picking there for Democrats if somebody can actually pull it off. And that's an important race. That's the elections office. And Bobby Holtzclaw has done, there's some things that I do think she isn't great on, but all in all, I think, especially for a Republican, she's done a good job, especially in the face of what her party thinks about elections in 2022.
So how soon do you think you're going to lose your podcast partner to a judgeship?
I know it's something I've talked to her about before, and I if she ever wants to make that make that leap, I would be highly supportive of her doing that as opposed to hosting our podcast. Now, the thing is, her opponents would have like 6 years of podcast clips to use against her. So, that's a tough call, but it would be great to have Jasmine on the bench for sure. Yvette De La Guardia, who I just mentioned, one of Jasmine's best friends, especially in the legal world. They served together as public defenders for quite a long time. So we were very happy that Yvette won. We both helped her out. So we were glad to see that. Yvette also becomes, I believe, the first Latina elected in the city of Louisville citywide. So that's pretty impressive for her. One other thing I did want to mention too, that is important. Lexington elected, I believe, 4 women of color into their LFUCG council, their city council, including 3 Black women and a Latina. So a pretty significant differentiation, especially from when I was there. It was a very white group. There were a few Black folks that were on the LFUCG council, but electing 4 people of color, especially 4 women of color in a city like Lexington, that's going to lead to probably some significant change in how that body operates. And that's good news, I think.
So last thing that I wanted to mention, and we've already actually sort of hinted at it. Am I incorrect, or did we see just this wave of women into the judiciary?
That happens this is a really interesting point, and one that's very important. We have been seeing that in Louisville and in Lexington, really mostly in Louisville, for quite a long time. And we are starting to see more and more women elected. The thing is, we are not all of these women are progressives, and not all of these women are necessarily allies to the way in which I would think. And I do think that there is kind of a default when you do not know who to vote for, that people vote for the woman. And if you are a progressive voter and that's important to you, it is very, very important that you learn about who these people are. There are some men who lost, who I thought were way better, way more progressive, would have been significantly better judges than the women who beat them. And I do think that there is just kind of this kind of inclination among progressive voters in Louisville to vote for the woman. And I think that a lot of that comes from a place of just kind of defaulting and maybe not. I mean, the ballot was so long, right? I mean, it was 2 full pages of races. Took a lot of work to get educated on these kinds of things. But just if you are a voter who cares about these things, I would, there's lots and lots of more than ever before there are resources for these elections. So definitely look some of them up before you enter the voting booth for sure.
Cool. Robert Kahne, election analyst extraordinaire.
At least when it comes to Kentucky, that's for sure.
At least Kentucky. That's right.
All right. Yeah.
All right.
Appreciate
Thank
it,
you for your time, and we'll have you again on sometime next year, maybe
in the near future. Sure. All right. Talk to you soon, Bruce. Bye.
Bye. That was my good friend Robert Kahne, co-host of the My Old Kentucky podcast with Jasmine Smith, and also a really good analyst and data mapper. Does some really fascinating work with mapping the results of elections and being able to really dig into what happened. I want to thank him again for being on the show. And yes, we will have him back sometime in 2023, I am sure. Our next show, I believe, is going to be an interview with Buddy Wheatley. We're going to learn how his race went and what he learned from it and what he can tell us about the process he went through. Until then, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Check out more shows at forwardky.com, and we'll see you next time.